I'm Nick Cruz, and I'm going to be doing Egyptian independence. Egyptian independence began in 1922 when the British gave the unilateral Declaration of Independence to King Farouk of Egypt, that's him pictured there, on February 28th, saying that they could be independent. However, England reserved the rights to control all foreign relations, communications, the Suez Canal, and the maintenance of the Sudan. And so it was still technically a protectorate, even though it had a paper saying that it wasn't. This changed with the Anglo-Egyptian Treaty of 1936, in which Farouk asked England to remove all of its military troops out of Egypt, except for the ones needed to maintain the canal, which was some 10,000 troops plus staff. Additionally, the United Kingdom would supply and train Egypt's army and assist in its defense in case of war. The treaty was supposed to last 20 years and was registered in the League of Nations in 1937. This seemingly ended the protectorate officially. However, when war reached Egypt in 1940, the British found this cause to protect their precious Suez Canal, which would give the Axis unlimited access to the Middle East and control the Mediterranean. Using this justification, they poured hundreds of thousands of troops into Egypt, effectively occupying it for 4 years with the grace of King Farouk. This changed at the end of World War II in 1945, when the British government petitioned that when the Egyptian government, petitioned that all British troops be removed, including those maintaining the Suez Canal, arguing that they could control the country. Now, the Wafd Party, which was making big gains here as a national force in Egypt, won the 1950 boycott election and moved to ratify this bill. Now, it was called the boycott election because the British had arrested the party's leaders in fear that they would win, and once they did win, just as the British feared, they ratified this new amendment to the treaty and forced all the British out of Egypt. However, this ratification was not enough. It didn't keep all the British out. It didn't keep them off the Suez Canal from using its profits. And so in 1952, clashes between British troops around the canal and police started, tensions mounted, and in Islamia, the city of Islamia, a clash on January 25th was so violent that 40 police were killed by the British military. The day after, riots went across Egypt and left 76 people dead in Cairo, and this sparked the entire revolution of 1952. The people rallied around Colonel Gamal Abdel Nasser and his military, while the British used King Farouk and his forces to kind of quell this rebellion. It didn't work. Colonel Gamal Abdel Nasser led the successful military coup on the Egyptian government during the 1952 revolution, seizing control from the monarchy and gave Egypt its independence. In January 1953, it had its first president, and this president eliminated all other political parties with the help of Nasser. However, Nasser wasn't getting enough power. Their differences were too drastic, and it led to more tension, which resulted in another uprising where Nasser, with the people's support, took complete control of the country in 1953, becoming president of Egypt, declaring Egypt a republic, and then he would remain president for the next 2 decades. His presidency was marked with several conflicts and crises, the first of which was the Suez Canal crisis. This happened because of Nasser's speech in Alexandria on July 26, 1956, which said he was going to officially nationalize the Suez Canal. He said 120,000 Egyptians had died building it. They owned it. They deserved sovereign use of the canal and own its profits. This led to an Israeli assault backed by the French and British in later that year, which resulted in 2,000 Egyptian deaths right at the start in the canal basin. They weren't prepared. This attack forced Nasser to move all his resources out of the Sinai Peninsula and center around only the canal. He armed the militias. He created a bunch of National Guards and gave civilians weapons to kind and bolster up and stop the Israeli force, and they did. However, the French were able to make an assault on Port Said. That's the picture there. They destroyed the port and resulted in thousands and thousands more Egyptian deaths. This was because Nasser had told his commanders to surrender, not at all, to hold out at all costs until the very end. They did this, and it was incredibly destructive. The Eisenhower administration condemned this invasion and supported UN resolutions demanding withdrawal and a United Nations emergency force to be stationed in the Sinai. Nasser commended Eisenhower, stating it was the greatest and most decisive role in stopping this conspiracy. By the end of December, British and French troops had totally withdrawn from the Egyptian territory. However, Nasser was later criticized for starting an unnecessary conflict and endangering all those people. Moving from there, Nasser would support Pan-Arabism, which was the idea that the entire Arab world should be independent. That's the picture you see highlighted in green there. He supported the Algerians in their fight for France and Tunisia and all these other countries to gain independence eventually, years later. He opposed the West. He was considered the head of the Pan-Arabism movement because of his victory, or what was termed a victory, of the Suez Canal crisis. The Cairo-based Voice of the Arabs radio station spread his ideas of United Arab Action throughout the Arabic-speaking world, so much so that historian Eugene Rogan wrote, "Nasser conquered the Arab world by radio." Lebanese sympathizers of Nasser in the Egyptian embassy in Beirut bought out Lebanese media outlets to further disseminate his ideals. His movement gained massive support by people that his followers called them the Nasserites, even though he preferred for them to be called Arab nationalists, and it would be a mainstay of his ideals and presidency until his death in 1970. Now, 3 years later, in 1961, Nasser sought to firmly establish Egypt as the leader of not only this Arab world, thanks to the Pan-Arabism movement, but also the Muslim world, and to promote a second evolution with the purpose of merging Islamic and socialist thinking, so that way Islam and Pan-Arabism would be the same, and he thought this would make a stronger force against the West. In order to do so, he needed to take more power and influence away from the radical Muslim Brotherhood Party, and to do this, he initiated several reforms to modernize Al-Azhar, which served as the modern and forward authority of Sunni Islam at the time and to today. That's the mosque pictured there. Nasser had used Al-Azhar's most willing ulama, or scholars, as a counterweight to the Brotherhood's Islamic influence starting in 1953, and by 1961 it had come to full fruition, and he had successfully detracted a lot of the Brotherhood's negative stuff towards his government and firmly rooted his Pan-Arabism with Islam. He was considered to be liked, and this idea really worked. However, this victory would not last, as in the same year, Nasser had to fight the 6 Days War. He would fight a couple more Western conflicts, all with Israel. In the 6-Day War, this happened because the Soviets told Nasser in May, he's a socialist, but remember his government was trying to push more into socialist tendencies. He had a lot of Soviet advisors, and the Soviet intelligence agency at the time told Nasser that Israel was preparing to invade Syria. This was super important because Syria was part of that Pan-Arab movement. It was close to Sudan and the Jordan, other countries that were aligning themselves with Egypt. It was seen as a symbol of the strength of the Arab and Muslim world. And so Nasser wanted to help. However, he hesitated because of his failures, or perhaps because of the losses that were taken in the Suez Canal. He wanted to play it out. However, on May 30th, Jordan asked Egypt to join the alliance it had with Syria to help defend it and defeat Israel. He was pushed by his military rival Amr to do so, and so he reluctantly accepted this on May 30th and decided to join the coalition with the idea to completely destroy Israel and the threat it presented to his government and to Pan-Arabism. However, on June 5th, the Israeli government retaliated, attacking the airfields of Egypt, its armor reserves inside the country, destroying several things along the Sinai, coming very close to the Egyptian border where civilians were, and completely decimating Nasser's military forces before they even had a chance to really go out and mobilize. And that's a picture of Israeli tanks rolling into Egypt. Nasser could not take the losses. He pulled his troops out within the 6 days, hence the name. Got Egypt out of the conflict. He blamed Amer for the losses that he sustained, saying that the Egyptian military clearly was not ready. His incompetence had led him and his military to be completely destroyed. And so, in that way, he ended the engagement officially. However, this loss not only shocked all of Egypt, it shocked all of the Arab world, because it was the first time that he and his government had actually lost to a Western power. Not even a Western power, Israel, an ally to a Western power. And so it would haunt his presidency from there on. And it would be the last major conflict of his presidency. That did not stop him, however, from declaring this war of attrition in 1968. And he did this by funding PLO attacks inside of Israel. He gave them money, weapons, training to allow them to attack Israel, hopefully trying to get Palestine to become a state. And once this was made public, Israel retaliated, even though there was no Egyptian mobilization, and Nasser never formally declared war because of the losses of the 6 Day War. Israel still attacked Egypt, once again attacking the Suez Canal, attacking airfields, shelling artillery. Those are the remains of Egyptian reconnaissance planes, just completely destroyed by this attack. Israel went all in. Nasser did not attack Israel. He ceased all military activities, instead pulled all of his troops away from Sinai Peninsula and the canal, and decided to start making an internal defense network along the canal's western bank, where civilians had to have been evacuated because of the Israeli attack. In November, Nasser brokered an agreement between the PLO and the Lebanese military that granted Palestinian guerrillas the right to use Lebanese territory to attack Israel, and this was stopped once again by a U.S. ceasefire. They both reluctantly agreed. Egypt agreed because it needed time to build its internal defense forces. Israel did not agree because it did not want to lose all of its possessions in the Sinai Peninsula. However, it reluctantly agreed once the U.S. changed it so that way they could keep the peninsula, but they could never touch Egyptian territory or the Suez Canal. Nasser used this to help build a better defense network and put missiles along the canal's region to further protect from Israeli invasion. Nasser, after this, would continue for the next 2 years to fight for Pan-Arabism, fight for the Palestinian state, try to get people to revolt, try to solidify his government, and would hold several summits. He unfortunately died at the end of one of his summits on September 28, 1970. He suffered a heart attack afterwards and was rushed to a hospital where he later died. He left a massive legacy. He's the most influential leader Egypt had had at the time. He was crucial to its actual independence, not the 1922 unilateral agreement, but real independence in 1952. He brought Egypt into the modern age. He defended it, and his loss was substantial to Egypt, its people, and its government. He was mourned by 5 million people. That's the funeral procession there. And it was really a shock to the whole Arab world. He was followed by his military counterpart, a close friend, not really vice president, but definitely head of the military during his presidency, and someone who was there when he died, someone who was very close to him, Anwar Sadat. However, as soon as becoming president, Sadat changed Egypt's Cold War allegiance from the Soviet Union to the United States, getting rid of all Soviet advisors in 1972, perhaps blaming them for the number of military failures it had had. Up to that point, he launched economic reforms that would fail and claimed